The Lion and the Rainstone. Prologue. The Curse of Jeluma. The storm tore through the night like a wild beast, its howling winds scattering dry leaves and debris across the sacred shrine of Jeluma. Beneath the flickering light of a cloud-obscured moon, the village elders stood in a semicircle, their weathered faces lined with determination and fear. At the center of their gathering, Ndulu loomed, her gaunt form shadowed by her tattered black cloak. Her staff, crowned with jagged crystals that seemed to swallow the faint light, thudded against the ground as she stepped forward. "You cannot do this to me," Ndulu hissed, her low and venomous. The air crackled with a dark energy that seemed to ripple from her very being. "After all I have done for this village, after all I have sacrificed." Chief Ekuru, the eldest among them, raised his trembling hand. His deep voice carried the weight of the entire village. "You betrayed the pact, Ndulu. You broke the balance." "The pact was flawed," she spat. Her pale, hollow cheeks tightened in a grimace, and her sharp eyes glinted with rage. "The spirits demand too much of us. Why should we grovel at their feet, offering them tributes while we scrape by? I sought to make us stronger." "The Rainstone was not yours to take," said another elder, her voice quavering with a mix of sadness and anger. "It is the lifeblood of Jeluma, a sacred bond to Enkaya. Without it, Ndulu interrupted, her voice rising to a piercing wail. "We could have been free of their whims. You are cowards, all of you." The storm intensified, the winds whipping her cloak around her like living shadows. For a brief moment, the lion statues that surrounded the shrine, the stone guardians of Jeluma, seemed to shimmer as if they were alive. "Return the Rainstone," Ekuru commanded, stepping forward, "and we will plead with the spirits for your forgiveness." Ndulu threw her head back and laughed, the sound bitter and sharp like shattered glass. "Forgiveness? From those who cast me out?" "Number. If Jeluma rejects me, I reject Jeluma." Raising her staff high above her head, she chanted in a guttural, ancient tongue. The ground beneath her feet cracked, and black tendrils of smoke erupted from the earth, twisting and writhing like serpents. The elders staggered back, clutching one another as the tendrils lashed toward them. "You will all wither," Ndulu snarled, her voice echoing unnaturally as the storm roared around her. "No rain shall fall, no crops shall grow. Your prayers will go unanswered until the worthy rise to undo what you have forgotten." She slammed her staff into the ground. The tendrils exploded outward, darkening the air like a shadowed storm. The lion statues that once glowed faintly dimmed into lifeless stone. The crackling energy vanished with a sudden finality, and Ndulu was gone, her chilling laughter fading into the silence. The elders collapsed to their knees, their breaths ragged. Chief Ekuru's trembling hands gripped the edge of the shrine's central altar as he looked toward the heavens. The storm clouds had vanished, replaced by an empty, oppressive stillness. "May Enkaya protect us," he whispered, his voice breaking, but deep in his heart, he knew the spirits would not answer. Jeluma had been cursed. Chapter 1. Jeluma's Struggle. The air in Jeluma was stifling, thick with dust that clung to the skin and made every breath an effort. The land, once vibrant with fields of maize and golden millet, stretched barren under the merciless sun. Cracked earth spread like a web of wounds across the village outskirts, and the steady buzz of flies filled the silence where children's laughter once echoed. Kia squatted beside an empty water trough, her calloused fingers tracing the worn edges of the clay. Her dark eyes narrowed as she watched the villagers gather in the square. Women with thin, sunken faces carried empty jugs, their shoulders hunched under invisible weights, The elders, sitting in the shade of the shrine's crumbling stone lions, murmured quiet prayers to the spirits. Kia's jaw tightened. Another prayer. Another day without rain. She picked up a pebble and hurled it across the square, watching as it skittered uselessly against the dried earth. "That won't help," came a soft voice behind her. Kia turned to see Mosi, her younger brother, standing a few paces away. His round face was creased with worry, and his hands fidgeted with a small leather-bound book, his constant companion. "Neither will sitting there praying all day," Kia muttered, rising to her feet. "The spirits aren't listening. They haven't been for years." Mosi glanced toward the shrine, his brow furrowing. "Grandmother says they will. We just have to keep faith." "Faith won't fill the wells," Kia snapped. She brushed past him, her cowrie-adorned braids swinging. "We can't just wait for miracles. Someone has to do something." "Like what?" Mosi followed her, his voice low but insistent. "What can we do that the elders haven't tried?" Kia didn't answer. She didn't have an answer. Not yet. That evening, the siblings sat cross-legged in their small clay-walled home, the flickering light of an oil lamp casting long shadows on the walls. Their grandmother, bent with age, but still radiating an air of quiet strength, sat weaving on a low wooden loom. The rhythmic click of her hands was the only sound in the room. "Grandmother," Mosi ventured hesitantly, breaking the silence. "Why did the spirits abandon us?" Their grandmother's hands paused. She looked up, her weathered face framed by the faint light. "The spirits never abandoned us," she said softly. "It is we who have forgotten them." Kia leaned forward, her brow furrowed. "How can we forget them when all we do is pray?" Grandmother smiled faintly, her dark eyes glinting with something unreadable. "Prayers without action are like seeds without rain. They may hold promise, but they cannot grow." She set down her loom and gestured toward the wooden shelf where a carved lion figurine rested. "Jeluma was once strong because of its bond with the spirits. Enkaya, the lion spirit, watched over us. The Rainstone brought life to our lands. But when we grew prideful, we forgot our promises. Ndulu's curse was only part of our undoing." Mosi's eyes widened. "What promises?" Grandmother's expression turned wistful. "To honor the balance, to protect the gifts we were given. Somewhere along the way, those promises were broken. And now the Rainstone waits, hidden, guarded. It will not return to us until the worthy reclaim it." "Hidden where?" Kia pressed, her voice sharp with curiosity. "That," Grandmother said, her voice dropping to a near whisper, "is something only the spirits can reveal." Later that night, when the village had settled into uneasy silence, Kia lay awake on her mat, staring at the wooden beams of the ceiling. The thought of the Rainstone gnawed at her. Was it real? Could it be the answer? "Kia," Mosi's voice broke through her thoughts. She turned to see him sitting up, clutching his leather book. "What now?" "I heard something earlier," he said, glancing toward the corner of the room. "From the crawl space under the house." Kia frowned. The crawl space had been used for storage long ago, but it had been empty for years. "You're imagining things," she muttered, rolling onto her side. But Mosi didn't move. "It didn't sound like the wind," he insisted. Kia sighed and sat up. "Fine. Let's go see, since you won't let me sleep otherwise." They crept across the room, careful not to wake their grandmother, and pulled back the woven mat that covered the entrance to the crawl space. The air below was cool and damp, carrying the faint smell of earth. "Go ahead," Kia said, nudging Mosi. "You're the one who wanted to come," he shot back, "because you wouldn't stop whining about it." With a roll of her eyes, Kia grabbed the lantern and climbed down the wooden ladder, Mosi close behind. The faint light revealed cobwebs draped across wooden beams and patches of packed dirt. It looked like any other crawl space, until Kia's lantern flickered and caught something faintly glowing against the far wall. "What's that?" Mosi whispered, his voice barely audible. Kia didn't answer. She stepped closer, holding the lantern high. The glow was coming from a series of carvings etched into the wall, lion symbols intertwined with curling vines and strange hieroglyphs. At the center of the carvings was a circular indentation about the size of a fist. "This wasn't here before," Mosi murmured. Kia reached out, her fingers brushing the edge of the circle. The air grew colder, and the faint hum of energy seemed to pulse beneath her fingertips. Before she could say anything, the wall trembled. Dust and dirt rained down as the carvings began to shift, the symbols twisting and realigning. With a low rumble, a section of the wall slid back, revealing a dark, spiraling staircase descending into the earth. Kia turned to Mosi, her eyes wide. "Still think prayers are enough?" The staircase spiraled downward, its edges rough and uneven, as if carved in haste or by something not entirely human. Kia's lantern threw flickering shadows against the damp stone walls, each twist and turn revealing nothing but more darkness ahead. Mosi clung close behind her, his small hands gripping the strap of her satchel. "Do you think this is safe?" he whispered. Kia glanced back, her eyes narrowing. "Do you think staying in Jeluma and waiting for the drought to kill us all is safe?" "Fair point," Mosi muttered, though his voice lacked conviction. The air grew colder with each step, a damp chill that made Kia's skin prickle. A low, almost imperceptible hum resonated through the narrow tunnel, vibrating in her chest like the steady thrum of a drumbeat. "Do you hear that?" Mosi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "Yeah," Kia said, pausing for a moment to listen. "It's coming from below." "Maybe we should go back," Mosi suggested, glancing nervously up the staircase. Kia rolled her eyes. "And tell grandmother we found a magical staircase and didn't follow it? She'd drag us right back down here herself." Mosi hesitated, but nodded, his grip tightening on her satchel. They continued downward, the hum growing louder and more distinct with each step. Finally, the staircase ended in a small circular chamber. The walls were covered in the same swirling carvings as the crawl space above, their glowing lines pulsing faintly like a heartbeat. In the center of the room stood a stone pedestal, its surface smooth and polished, as though untouched by time. Atop the pedestal hovered a shimmering disk of light, its edges rippling like water. Colors swirled within it, deep blues, silvers, and purples that seemed to shift and blend as Kia moved closer. "A portal," Mosi breathed, his voice tinged with awe and fear. Kia stepped closer, holding the lantern high. The light from the portal reflected in her wide eyes, casting her sharp features in an otherworldly glow. "What do you think it leads to?" she asked, though she wasn't sure she wanted an answer. "Nowhere good," Mosi replied quickly, pulling on her arm. "Come on, Kia. We don't know what's on the other side." "That's the point," Kia said, shaking him off. "If this has something to do with the Rainstone, we have to find out." "And if it has something to do with Ndulu?" Kia hesitated. The thought of the Witch of Shadows sent a chill down her spine, but she forced herself to push the fear aside. "We'll deal with that if we have to. For now, we look." She reached out, her hand hovering just above the rippling surface of the portal. The hum grew louder, filling the room with a strange, almost musical vibration. "Kia, wait!" Mosi began, but it was too late. The moment her fingers touched the light, a powerful force pulled them forward. The lantern fell from her hand, its flame extinguished as the siblings were sucked into the portal. The sensation was like being caught in a whirlwind, the air rushing past them as flashes of colour and light danced around them. Kia felt weightless, her limbs flailing as she struggled to make sense of the chaos. Mosi's panicked cries reached her ears, muffled and distant. Then, as suddenly as it began, the whirlwind stopped. Kia hit the ground hard, the breath knocked from her lungs. She groaned, pushing herself up on trembling arms. The surface beneath her hands was smooth and cold, like polished stone. "Mosi!" she called, her voice echoing strangely in the stillness. "Here," came his shaky reply. He was a few feet away, sitting up and rubbing his head. Kia's eyes adjusted to the dim light, and her breath caught. They were no longer in the chamber beneath their home. The space around them was vast and otherworldly, a swirling void of darkness punctuated by faint glimmers of light. Shadows twisted and danced at the edges of her vision, their shapes constantly shifting and reforming. The air was heavy, almost suffocating, and filled with a low, whispering sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. "This isn't Jeluma," Mosi said, his voice trembling. Kia helped him to his feet, her own legs unsteady. "No kidding," she muttered, though her voice lacked its usual sharpness. At the center of the space, a faint glow caught her attention. She squinted, taking a cautious step forward. The glow grew brighter as they approached, revealing a small pedestal similar to the one in the chamber above. Resting on the pedestal was a talisman, its surface etched with intricate symbols that seemed to shift and shimmer as the light touched them. "What is it?" Mosi asked, peering over her shoulder. "I don't know," Kia admitted, reaching out to touch it. But before her fingers could make contact, the talisman began to pulse with light. The whispers in the air grew louder, and the shadows around them seemed to draw closer. "Kia," Mosi said, his voice urgent, "I think we should go." The light from the talisman flared, blinding them for a moment. When it faded, a figure stood before them, a tall, graceful woman with ebony skin and glowing golden eyes. Her hair was coiled in intricate braids, and her long robes shimmered as if woven from starlight. Who are you?" Kia asked, her voice barely audible. The woman's gaze swept over them, calm and piercing. "I am Afia," she said, her voice resonant and powerful. "You have awakened what has long been forgotten." Afia's golden eyes seemed to pierce through Kia and Mosi, their radiance filling the dim void. The siblings stood frozen, unsure whether to run, bow, or speak. "You are children of Jeluma," Afia said, her voice smooth and measured, carrying the cadence of ancient wisdom. "The blood of the ancestors flows through your veins. You have found the talisman because it was meant for you." Kia stepped forward, her nerves forgotten. "We didn't mean to—" "You were meant to," Afia interrupted, her glowing gaze locking onto Kia. "The spirits have called you. The drought, the shadows, the desolation of your village. They are not mere misfortune. They are the echoes of a broken promise. A pact shattered by greed and jealousy." Mosi tugged on Kia's arm. "I told you we shouldn't have come here," he muttered. Quiet, Kia hissed, her eyes still on Afia. What do you mean, a broken promise? Afia gestured to the talisman, which floated above the pedestal, spinning slowly as its etchings glowed. The Rainstone was the heart of Jeluma's pact with the spirits, a sacred artifact gifted by Enkaya to ensure balance between your people and the land. But centuries ago, the witch Ndulu betrayed that trust. She stole the Rainstone, and with it, the rains that nourished your home. Why? Mosi blurted out. Ndulu was consumed by her own pain, Afia said, her voice heavy with regret. She believed the spirits had abandoned her and sought to claim the Rainstone's power for herself. When the village cast her out, her anger became a curse. She fled into the realm of shadows, taking the Rainstone with her. Now it lies hidden, guarded by darkness and peril. Without it, Jeluma's lands cannot heal. Kia's heart pounded. So the Rainstone is real, and you want us to... What? Go after it? Afia nodded, her expression solemn. You must. The talisman has chosen you, and through it, I will guide you. But this path is fraught with danger. The shadows are not merely the absence of light. They are alive, and they will fight to keep what Ndulu has stolen. But we're just kids, Mosi said, his voice rising with panic. We can't fight shadow creatures. And what about Ndulu? Is she still alive? Afia's gaze shifted to him, softening slightly. Ndulu is no longer the woman she once was. The shadows have twisted her, binding her to their will. She is both alive and not alive. To reclaim the Rainstone, you must face her. Kia glanced at Mosi, who was pale and trembling. She stepped between him and Afia, squaring her shoulders. What if we don't do it? Afia's glowing eyes dimmed briefly, as if with sadness. Then Jeluma will wither and die. The drought will consume your home and the shadows will spread beyond the village. The balance must be restored, or all will be lost. Kia clenched her fists. The thought of her village, of her grandmother, the elders, the children, fading into nothingness, sent a jolt of determination through her. Fine, she said firmly. We'll do it. Tell us what we need to do. Kia, Mosi hissed, you can't just agree to... Do you want the drought to end or not? Kia shot back, her voice sharp. We can't just sit around and wait for someone else to fix this. Mosi opened his mouth to argue, but closed it again, his shoulders slumping. Afia stepped closer, her luminous form radiating warmth despite the chill of the void. You are braver than you know, she said, her gaze steady on Kia. The path will not be easy, but I believe in you. The first step is to return to Jeluma and gather allies. This is not a journey you can make alone. Allies? Kia frowned. Who's going to believe us? The talisman will reveal its truth to those who are meant to follow you, Afia said. Seek those with open hearts and strong spirits. Together, you must find the library of Umoya, hidden deep in the desert. It holds the knowledge you will need to reach the cave of eternal shadows, where the Rainstone lies. Great, Kia muttered, her confidence faltering slightly. The desert, the cave, and a library full of riddles. Sounds simple. Afia smiled faintly. The talisman will guide you. Trust in it, and trust in each other. And remember, Kia. She placed her hand gently over the talisman, which glowed brighter in response. Rain does not come from the sky alone. It begins in the heart, where courage meets balance. You must find your own balance if you are to succeed. Before Kia could ask what that meant, the void around them began to shimmer. The swirling shadows receded, and the hum of the talisman grew louder, filling the space with a vibrant energy. "Wait!" Mosi shouted. "How do we get back?" Afia's voice echoed, growing fainter as the light intensified. "The talisman will lead the way. Go now, children of Jeluma. Your journey begins." The world around them dissolved into brilliant light, and the next thing Kia knew, she was lying on the floor of the crawl space, gasping for air. Mosi was sprawled beside her, clutching the talisman to his chest. Kia sat up, her head spinning. The carved wall was gone, replaced by smooth earth, as if the staircase had never existed. "Kia?" Mosi's voice was shaky as he held up the glowing talisman. What do we do now?" Kia wiped the dirt from her face, her heart still pounding. She looked at the talisman, then at her brother. "We find the Rainstone," she said, her voice steady despite the fear bubbling inside her. "And we save Jeluma." The village was quiet when Kia and Mosi emerged from their home at dawn, the pale light casting long shadows across the cracked earth. The scent of dust and ash lingered in the air, carried on a faint, dry breeze. Kia squinted toward the village square, where a few villagers shuffled about, their movements slow and heavy. Empty buckets hung from the hands of women heading to the dry well, their faces lined with exhaustion. "Same as every day," Mosi muttered, clutching the talisman tightly. Its glow had faded, but its etched symbols still seemed to shimmer faintly in the early light. "Not anymore," Kia said, glancing down at the talisman. "We know what's causing this now, and we know what we have to do." "Do we, though?" Mosi asked, his tone edged with doubt. "We don't know where this library is, or what's in the desert, or even who we're supposed to ask for help." Kia rolled her eyes. "The spirit said the talisman will guide us. We just have to trust it." Mosi hesitated, then nodded reluctantly. As they stepped into the square, Kia felt the weight of the villagers' gazes on them. Suspicious, curious, weary. She caught snippets of murmured conversation as they passed. Strange children, always wandering off. Nothing but trouble, that one. Kia clenched her fists, her jaw tightening. Let them talk. They'd see soon enough. When they reached their grandmother's small weaving stall near the edge of the square, she was already at work, her hands deftly threading bright, colourful yarn through the loom. The vibrant patterns of her work stood in stark contrast to the bleakness around them. She looked up as they approached, her dark eyes sharp and questioning. "You're up early," she said, her tone neutral. Kia hesitated, exchanging a glance with Mosi. "We found something," she said carefully. Their grandmother's hands stilled on the loom, her gaze narrowing. "What kind of something?" Kia lowered her voice. "Something about the spirits, about the Rainstone. We think we can fix what's happening to the village." Mosi pulled the talisman from his satchel, holding it up for her to see. Her eyes widened, and for a moment, a flicker of something like fear crossed her face. "Where did you get that?" she asked, her voice low and urgent. Kia hesitated. "Beneath the house," she admitted. "There was a portal, and a spirit named Afia. She said the talisman chose us to find the Rainstone and save Jeluma." Their grandmother's lips pressed into a thin line, her gaze flicking between them and the talisman. Finally, she sighed and gestured for them to sit. "You've opened a door that hasn't been touched in generations," she said quietly. "The talisman is powerful and dangerous. If it truly chose you, then the spirits must see something in you that the rest of us cannot." Mosi fidgeted nervously. "Do you believe us?" Their grandmother gave him a long, measured look. "I've lived too many years to dismiss the will of the spirits," she said. "But this is no small thing you've undertaken. If you mean to go after the Rainstone, you'll need guidance." "That's what Afia said," Kia said quickly. "We need allies. People who will help us." Their grandmother nodded slowly. "There's a map," she said. "In the shrine where the elders meet. It's old. Older than I am. But it may lead you to the library of Umoya. If the talisman is truly guiding you, it will show you the way." Kia leaned forward. "How do we get the map?" Her grandmother's lips twitched in a faint smile. "The elders won't give it to you outright. They're too bound by tradition to see past their fears. You'll have to convince them, or take it without asking." Mosi's eyes widened. "You're not serious!" "I'm always serious, boy," she said, her gaze sharp. "The question is, how serious are you?" Kia grinned, her confidence returning. "Serious enough?" "Good," her grandmother said. "But be careful. There are some in this village who would rather see the spirits forgotten than risk stirring old magic." Mosi frowned. "Why?" "Fear," their grandmother said simply. "Not everyone trusts the spirits, and not everyone will trust you." Kaya felt a pang of unease at her words, but quickly pushed it aside. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly. Her grandmother gave her a long, searching look, then nodded. "You'll need more than just determination," she said. "Find the map, and watch each other's backs." Kia and Mosi stood, the weight of her words settling over them like a shadow. As they turned to leave, their grandmother's voice stopped them. "And Kia," she said, her tone soft but firm, "be sure you know what you're willing to risk. The spirits do not choose lightly." Kia nodded, her heart pounding. "We'll be careful." But as they walked away, the unease in her chest lingered. She could feel the talisman pulsing faintly in her satchel, as if it, too, was waiting. The Elder's shrine stood at the heart of Jeluma, its weathered stone walls rising above the sun-scorched square, like a forgotten monument to better days. Carved lions flanked the entrance, their features eroded by time but still imposing, their empty eyes watching the siblings as they approached. Kia crouched behind a stack of clay pots near the shrine's side, her eyes scanning the empty square for movement. The afternoon heat bore down on her, beads of sweat forming along her brow. "Are you sure about this?" Mosi whispered, crouching beside her. He clutched the satchel containing the talisman like a lifeline. "We need that map," Kia replied, her voice low but resolute. "Unless you have a better idea." Mosi hesitated, then shook his head. "Thought so." Kia smirked, then darted toward the shrine's narrow side door, her movements quick and deliberate. Mosi followed reluctantly, his footsteps lighter than hers despite his nervous fidgeting. The side door creaked as Kia pushed it open, revealing a dimly lit interior lined with carved pillars. The air was cooler here, carrying a faint, earthy smell mixed with the sharp tang of dried herbs. At the far end of the chamber, a wooden table was piled with scrolls, maps, and artifacts. "There," Kia whispered, pointing toward the table. Mosi glanced around nervously. The elders could come back any minute. "Then we better move fast," Kia said, striding forward. The scrolls were fragile, their edges brittle and crumbling as Kia carefully unrolled one after another. Her eyes scanned the faded ink, searching for anything resembling a map. "Help me look," she said, glancing at Mosi. He hesitated, then began sifting through the pile, his movements tentative. Minutes passed in tense silence, the only sound the faint rustle of parchment. "Found it," Mosi whispered suddenly, holding up a long, narrow scroll. Kia snatched it from him, unrolling it with care. The map was rough and hand-drawn, its lines faded but legible. At the center was Jeluma, surrounded by a ring of symbols she didn't recognize. To the south, a winding path led into the desert, marked by more symbols that seemed to shimmer faintly in the dim light. "This has to be it," Kia said, her pulse quickening. Before Mosi could reply, a deep voice echoed from the shadows. "What are you doing here?" The siblings froze, the scroll still in Kia's hands. From behind, a pillar stepped Elder Seifu, his tall, gaunt frame silhouetted against the dim light. His sharp features were set in a scowl, his piercing eyes narrowing as they fell on the map. "That does not belong to you," he said, his voice cold and commanding. Kia swallowed hard, her mind racing. "We're just borrowing it," she said, trying to sound braver than she felt. Seifu's scowl deepened as he stepped closer. "You think the spirits will reward thieves?" "We're trying to help the village," Mosi blurted out, his voice shaking. "We know about the Rainstone, and the Talisman chose us to—" "Silence," Seifu snapped, his voice echoing through the chamber. His gaze flicked to the satchel in Mosi's hands, and his expression darkened. "You meddle with forces you cannot understand," he said, his voice low and dangerous. "The spirit's gifts are not toys for children." "We're not playing!" Kia shot back, her voice sharp. "The spirits chose us because the elders have done nothing. You sit here praying while the village dies." Seifu's eyes flared with anger, but he didn't respond immediately. His hand moved to the beaded staff he carried, his fingers tightening around it. "You think you are brave," he said finally, his tone icy. "But bravery without wisdom is a path to ruin." The air in the chamber seemed to grow heavier, the shadows deepening as Seifu stepped closer. "Leave the talisman, leave the map, and leave this place, now." Kia's heart pounded. She glanced at Mosi, whose wide eyes were filled with panic. "No," she said firmly, clutching the map tighter. "We're taking this, and we're going to fix what you couldn't." Seifu raised his staff, and the air around him seemed to shimmer with a faint, dark energy. Kia braced herself, but before Seifu could strike, the talisman in Mosi's satchel flared to life. Its glow filled the chamber, blinding in its intensity. Seifu staggered back, shielding his eyes. The energy around him dissipated, and the shadows in the room seemed to retreat. "Go!" Kia shouted, grabbing Mosi's arm. They bolted toward the side door, the talisman's light guiding their way. Seifu's shouts echoed behind them, but he didn't follow. Once outside, the siblings didn't stop running until they reached the edge of the village. They collapsed under the shade of an acacia tree, their breaths coming in gasps. Mosi clutched the talisman, his hands trembling. That was close. Kia nodded, unrolling the map again. Her hands were shaking too, but she forced herself to focus. "We have it now," she said, her voice steadier than she felt. "The elders can't stop us. This is our chance." Mosi didn't reply immediately. His gaze lingered on the talisman, its glow now faint but steady. "Do you think Seifu was right?" he asked quietly. Kia frowned. "About what?" "That we don't understand what we're doing." Kia's jaw tightened. She thought of their grandmother's words, of the warnings Afia had given them. Maybe they didn't understand everything. But if they didn't try, Jeluma was doomed. "We'll figure it out," she said firmly. "We have to." Mosi nodded slowly, though doubt lingered in his eyes. Kia folded the map and tucked it into her satchel. "Let's go. We have allies to find." Together, they stood and began walking back toward the village, the weight of their mission settling heavily on their shoulders. Chapter 2. The Portal to Shadows. The faint hum of the talisman filled the quiet of the night as Kia held it in her palm, its gentle glow lighting the small crawl space beneath their home. Mosi crouched beside her, gripping the lantern tightly, his wide eyes scanning the dim walls as if expecting them to shift again. "Are you sure this is where it's leading us?" Mosi whispered. "Yes," Kia said, though the truth was she wasn't entirely certain. Ever since they'd taken the map from the shrine, the talisman had grown restless, pulsing with warmth as if urging them to act. When she'd placed it on the floor earlier, the hum had intensified, and the ground beneath it had trembled faintly. Now they were here again, back in the crawl space, waiting for something to happen. Kia pressed her hand against the dirt wall where the staircase had appeared before. "It was right here," she said, glancing at Mosi. "Last time it just opened." Mosi hesitated, then reached for the talisman. "Maybe it needs to..." Before he could finish, the ground beneath their feet quaked, sending a cascade of dirt raining down on their heads. The lantern in Mosi's hand flickered as a deep, resonant vibration filled the air. "Kia!" Mosi yelped, scrambling backward. Kia stepped closer to the wall, her heart pounding. The carvings reappeared, glowing faintly, their lines twisting and shifting like living things. The center indentation, the one that had pulsed with light before, began to shine again, this time brighter, until it was impossible to look directly at it. The wall groaned and shifted, sliding aside with a grinding sound that made Mosi wince. The staircase revealed itself once more, spiraling downward into the earth, its depths swallowed by shadow. Kia exhaled, a mix of fear and exhilaration coursing through her. She glanced at her brother. "Ready?" Mosi's face paled, but he nodded. "Not really, but let's go anyway." The descent felt longer this time, the air growing colder and heavier with each step. The faint hum of the talisman was now a steady thrum, like a heartbeat in the darkness. Mosi gripped her arm tightly as they reached the bottom. "Do you hear that?" Kia paused, straining to listen. At first, there was only silence. Then came the whispers, soft, indistinct murmurs, like a distant conversation carried on the wind. "Spirits?" Mosi asked, his voice barely audible. "Maybe," Kia replied, though she wasn't sure. The chamber at the base of the staircase was just as they'd left it, the carvings along the walls glowing faintly. The portal still shimmered at the center, its swirling colors beckoning like a forbidden treasure. Mosi hesitated, hanging back as Kia approached the portal. "You really think we should do this?" he asked. "You heard Afia," Kia said. "The answers we need are on the other side. We don't have a choice." "But what if..." "Mosi!" Kia interrupted, her voice firm. "We can't let the village die. We have to do this." Her brother swallowed hard, his gaze darting to the portal. Then, reluctantly, he nodded. Together they stepped forward. Crossing through the portal felt like stepping into a rushing river. The force pulled at Kia's body, weightless and overwhelming all at once. Colors and shapes blurred around her, swirling in dizzying patterns. When her feet finally touched solid ground, she stumbled, gasping for air. Mosi landed beside her, clutching the talisman like a lifeline. The realm of shadows stretched out before them, a vast, surreal expanse of muted colours and shifting forms. The ground beneath their feet was smooth and dark, like polished obsidian, and the air was thick with an unnatural stillness. Faint glimmers of light dotted the horizon, flickering like distant stars. Shadows twisted and danced at the edges of their vision, their forms shifting and merging as if alive. This place is... Mosi trailed off, his voice trembling. Wrong, Kia finished, her gaze sweeping the strange landscape. She took a cautious step forward, the sound of her footsteps swallowed by the oppressive silence. The talisman pulsed in her hand, its light cutting through the gloom like a beacon. Do you think the Rainstone is here? Mosi asked, staying close behind her. No, Kia said, shaking her head. See, Fia said we'd find it in the cave of eternal shadows. This must be something else. A faint, flickering light caught her attention ahead. She moved toward it, her heart racing. As they approached, the light grew brighter, revealing a series of floating symbols suspended in the air. They were similar to the carvings they'd seen before, but these were larger, more intricate, their edges glowing with an otherworldly brilliance. What do you think they mean? Mosi asked, his voice hushed. Kia reached out, her fingers brushing one of the symbols. The moment she made contact, the symbols burst into light, and the whispers around them grew louder. Images flickered in the air like ghostly projections. A swirling storm, a lion with a golden mane, a woman cloaked in shadows. Kia's breath caught as she recognized the woman. Ndulu, she whispered. The image of the witch loomed larger, her face twisted with anger and grief. Her voice echoed through the chamber, layered with the whispers of countless others. You will never take it from me, she hissed, her eyes blazing with fury. The Rainstone is mine. The balance is broken, and I shall never relinquish its power. The vision shattered, the symbols dissolving into faint wisps of light. Mosi grabbed Kia's arm, his face pale. We shouldn't be here. We have to be, Kia said, her voice trembling. Before Mosi could argue, the shadows around them began to move, coalescing into solid shapes. Dark, hulking forms with glowing red eyes emerged, their twisted limbs crackling with malevolent energy. Kia stepped back, her grip tightening on the talisman. The shadows advanced, their movements slow but deliberate. What do we do? Mosi whispered, his voice shaking. The talisman flared suddenly, its light growing brighter. The shadows hissed, recoiling as if burned. Stay close, Kia said, her voice firm despite the fear gnawing at her. Holding the talisman high, she stepped forward, the light cutting a path through the encroaching darkness. The shadows hesitated, their forms wavering, before melting back into the void. The siblings stood in silence, their breaths ragged. We need to leave, Mosi said finally, his voice trembling. Kia nodded, glancing at the portal behind them. Not yet, she said, her voice resolute. There's more to learn here. The realm of shadows pulsed with a strange, lifeless rhythm, the air heavy with an unnatural stillness that pressed on Kia's chest. Every step felt tentative, each echo of their movement swallowed by the swirling darkness around them. Mosi clung to the talisman, its faint glow the only source of light in the endless gloom. Kia, he whispered, his voice barely audible over the hum of the artifact. What if this place is alive? Kaya didn't respond immediately. She kept her eyes forward, her gaze darting between the faint glimmers of light that appeared and disappeared at the edges of her vision. She didn't want to admit it, but the thought had crossed her mind too. The shadows moved like living things, twisting and stretching, and Kia could almost swear they were watching her. "We're not staying long," she said finally, her voice steady despite the knot in her stomach. "We just need to figure out what Afia wanted us to see." "But what if—" Before Mosi could finish, the talisman in his hands flared brightly, its glow piercing the darkness. The siblings froze as the swirling shadows stilled, retreating slightly, and the whispers around them grew louder. "Kia! Mosi!" The voice was rich and resonant, echoing from nowhere and everywhere at once. A faint golden light appeared ahead, growing brighter and more defined until Afia's form materialized before them. Her glowing eyes met theirs, calm and steady, though there was a weight in her expression that hadn't been there before. "You have entered a place few dare to tread," she said, her voice carrying an edge of warning. "The realm of shadows is not kind to the uninvited." "Then why are we here?" Kia asked, her brow furrowing. Afia stepped closer, her robes shimmering like liquid light as she moved. "Because this is where the truth lies hidden," she said. "The shadows hold memories of what was lost, but they also feed on fear, doubt, and anger. If you are to succeed in your quest, you must learn to face them without letting them consume you." Mosi shifted uncomfortably, his grip on the talisman tightening. "The shadows. They attacked us," he said, his voice trembling. Afia nodded. "They are echoes of Ndulu's curse, born of her bitterness and rage. They seek to protect what she has taken, but their power is not absolute. The talisman shields you because it carries the spirit's blessing. Guard it well. It will be your light in the darkness." Kia glanced at the talisman, then back at Afia. "You said the Rainstone is in the Cave of Eternal Shadows. How do we get there?" "The path will not be easy," Afia said, her expression solemn. "The desert will test your resolve. The library of Umoya holds the knowledge you need, but it is protected by riddles and trials that will challenge you as individuals and as a team. Only by working together can you find the answers you seek." "Trials?" Mosi asked nervously. Afia's gaze softened slightly. "The spirits must be sure you are worthy," she said. "The Rainstone is not merely a tool. It is a bond, a promise of balance and harmony with the land. If you are not prepared to honor that promise, it will reject you." Kia squared her shoulders. "We'll pass the trials," she said firmly, "whatever it takes." Afia studied her for a long moment, as if weighing her resolve. Finally, she nodded. "Your courage is admirable," she said, "but courage alone is not enough. Remember, Kia, rain does not fall because it is strong. It falls because it knows when to let go." Kia frowned, the words stirring something she couldn't quite grasp. "What does that mean?" Afia smiled faintly. "You will understand in time." Before Kia could press further, the shadows around them began to stir again, their movements growing more erratic. The whispers turned into a low, ominous murmur that sent a chill down her spine. Afia's expression hardened. "The shadows are growing restless. It is time for you to leave this place." "Wait," Kia said. "Is there anything else we need to know?" Afia's form began to fade, her golden light dimming as the darkness closed in. "Trust in each other," she said, her voice echoing faintly. "And trust in the talisman. It will guide you, even when all seems lost." With those final words, Afia vanished, leaving Kia and Mosi alone in the encroaching shadows. The talisman flared again, its light pushing back the darkness as Kia grabbed Mosi's arm. "Come on!" she said, her voice urgent. "We need to get out of here." "But how?" Mosi asked, his voice shaking. Kia scanned the void, her heart racing. The portal was gone, swallowed by the shifting shadows. The talisman pulsed in Mosi's hands, its glow shifting to a soft blue. Kia felt a tug, like a faint pull in her chest, urging her to move. "This way," she said, following the pull. The shadows hissed and writhed as they moved, but the talisman's light kept them at bay. The pull grew stronger, guiding them through the darkness until, at last, a faint shimmer appeared ahead. The portal re-emerged, its swirling colours brighter and more vibrant than before. "Go!" Kia shouted, pushing Mosi toward it. They leapt through together, the rush of energy pulling them forward. When they landed back in the crawl space, the air felt lighter, though the faint hum of the talisman lingered. Kia and Mosi sat in silence for a moment, catching their breath. "What now?" Mosi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kia looked at the talisman, its glow steady and unwavering. "Now," she said, her voice firm, "we find the library, and we pass those trials." Mosi nodded, though the fear in his eyes hadn't fully faded. Kia helped him to his feet, her resolve hardening. The path ahead was uncertain, but one thing was clear. The journey had truly begun. The sun hung low over Jeluma as Kia and Mosi emerged from their home, their clothes streaked with dirt and their faces set with quiet determination. The talisman hung around Kia's neck now, its glow concealed beneath her tunic, but still pulsing faintly, as if eager to be on the move. The village square was alive with the usual routine. Women returning from the dry well with empty buckets, children playing listlessly under the acacia trees, and the elders murmuring their endless prayers at the shrine. Kia's eyes scanned the square, searching for familiar faces. She spotted Zahara near the herbalist's stall, grinding leaves into a paste with practiced precision. Her short hair glistened in the sun, and her tattoos, intricate lines representing her training as a healer, gleamed with fresh oil. "Zahara," Kia said, striding toward her. The older girl glanced up, her piercing eyes narrowing as she noticed Kia's determined expression. "What now?" she asked, her tone as sharp as the knife she used to chop roots. "We need your help," Kia said, leaning closer so the conversation wouldn't carry. "With what?" Zahara asked, not pausing in her work. Kia hesitated, glancing at Mosi for support. He fidgeted nervously, avoiding Zahara's skeptical gaze. "It's about the Rainstone," Kia said, finally. Zahara froze, her knife halting mid-slice. She straightened, her expression hardening. "Don't joke about that," she said, her voice low. "I'm not joking," Kia said, her voice firm. "We've found something that could bring it back and end the drought. But we can't do it alone." Zahara's eyes flicked between Kia and Mosi, searching for any sign of a lie. Finally she sighed, setting the knife down. "Explain." By the time Kia finished recounting their discovery of the talisman and the portal, Zahara's skepticism had turned to cautious interest. "You're serious," Zahara said, her tone more curious than accusatory. "As serious as the drought," Kia replied. Zahara considered this, her brow furrowing. "Even if I believed you, and I'm not saying I do, how exactly am I supposed to help?" I'm a healer, not a raincaller. We don't know exactly what we'll need, Kia admitted. But Afia said we need allies. And you're the smartest person in this village. Zahara's lips twitched in what might have been a faint smile, though it vanished quickly. Flattery won't get you far, Kia. Is that a no? Kia pressed, crossing her arms. Zahara exhaled slowly. It's a maybe. If this is real, then I can't ignore it. But if you're lying... She let the unspoken threat hang in the air. Kia smirked. You'll see soon enough. Next, the siblings sought out Kwesi, the village's self-proclaimed storyteller. They found him lounging under an acacia tree, twirling his carved walking stick and entertaining a group of children with a tale about a cunning hare and a foolish lion. And just as the lion pounced, Kwesi said, leaping to his feet and swiping at the air with exaggerated movements, the hare darted through his legs and vanished into the bush. That's why lions still chase hares to this day, out of pure embarrassment. The children erupted in laughter, though Kia noticed some of the older villagers casting disapproving glances his way. Kwesi grinned, clearly unbothered, and tipped his head in a mock bow. Kwesi! Kia called, stepping forward as the children scattered. He turned, his grin widening. Ah, my favorite troublemaker. To what do I owe the honor? We need to talk, Kia said, glancing around. Somewhere private. Kwesi raised an eyebrow but nodded, following them to a quieter corner near the edge of the square. What's this about? The Rainstone? Kia said simply. Kwesi's playful demeanor faltered, his grin slipping. That's not funny, Kia. I'm not joking, she said, her tone serious. We found something. Something real. But we need your help to finish what we started. Kwesi stared at her for a long moment, then chuckled softly. You've really gone off the deep end this time. Listen to her, Mosi said, surprising both Kia and Kwesi with the firmness in his voice. She's telling the truth. We've seen things. The talisman, the portal, the spirit of Afia. It's all real. Kwesi's brow furrowed as he studied them, his usual air of confidence replaced by something more cautious. Finally, he sighed and leaned on his walking stick. Let's say I believe you, he said. Why me? What could I possibly do that would help? You're clever, Kia said. You think fast. And you know how to talk your way out of anything. We're going to need that if we're going to survive this. Kwesi smirked faintly. Flattery, huh? You really are desperate. Is that a yes? Kia asked, her gaze steady. Kwesi hesitated, then shrugged. Fine. But if this turns out to be some elaborate prank, you're going to owe me a year's worth of stories. Kia grinned. Deal. By the time the siblings returned home that evening, the group was loosely formed. Zahara and Kwesi had agreed to meet them the next day, though both had their doubts. Mosi sank onto his mat, his shoulders slumping. Do you think they'll actually stick with us? They will, Kia said confidently, though she wasn't entirely sure herself. Once they see what we've seen, they'll understand. And what if they don't? Kia hesitated, then glanced at the talisman glowing faintly against her chest. Then we'll do it ourselves, she said quietly. The weight of their mission pressed heavily on her as she lay down to rest, the hum of the talisman filling the silence. Tomorrow, the journey would truly begin. The horizon glowed faintly with the first light of dawn, as Kia, Mosi, Zahara, and Kwesi gathered near the edge of the village. The lone acacia tree provided a modicum of shelter from the morning chill, its spindly branches swaying gently in the breeze. Kia spread the map out on the ground, weighing the edges down with stones. The faint markings shimmered in the dim light, as though imbued with their own quiet magic. "This," Kia began, pointing to a marked spot near the bottom of the map, "is where the Library of Umoya is supposed to be. It's deep in the desert, past the hills to the south." Kwesi knelt beside her, resting his chin on his walking stick. "And how exactly do you plan to get there? None of us has ever been that far before." "The talisman will guide us," Kia said firmly, holding it up. It pulsed faintly, its glow steady and reassuring. "That thing again," Zahara muttered, crossing her arms. "You keep saying it's going to help, but so far, all it's done is get you chased out of the shrine." "It's already proven it works," Mosi said, his voice quieter than Kia's but no less determined. "It brought us to the portal. It led us to Afia." Zahara frowned, her expression skeptical. "Even if I believe you, what happens if it stops working? Or worse, if it leads us into danger?" Kwesi chuckled softly. "Oh, danger is guaranteed. Look at us. 2 kids, a healer, and a storyteller on a quest to save the village. Sounds like the setup to a tragedy, not a victory." Kia shot him a glare. "If you think this is so hopeless, why are you even here?" Kwesi shrugged, grinning. "Curiosity, and maybe a little boredom." "You could take this seriously for once," Kia snapped. "And you could stop acting like you've already got everything figured out," Kwesi shot back, his grin fading. "This isn't some game where you get to be the hero, Kia. People are counting on us. Your family, the whole village. If we screw this up..." "We won't," Kia interrupted, her voice sharp. "How can you be so sure?" Zahara asked, her tone cutting. "Because we have to do this," Kia said, her gaze sweeping over the group. "No one else will. The elders are too scared, and the rest of the village has given up. If we don't at least try, everyone in Jeluma will die." Her words hung in the air, heavy and final. Mosi shifted uncomfortably, glancing between Zahara and Kwesi. "She's right," he said softly. "I don't want to do this either, but we don't have a choice." Zahara exhaled sharply, shaking her head. "Fine. But if we're doing this, we need a real plan. Not just follow the glowing trinket and hope for the best. The desert isn't forgiving, and we'll need supplies, water, and protection from the heat." "And stories," Kwesi added, his grin returning. "Can't survive a journey without good stories to pass the time." Kia ignored him, turning back to the map. "We'll gather everything we can today. Zahara, you know more about survival than the rest of us. Can you handle the supplies?" Zahara nodded, her jaw set. "Kia and I will find extra containers for water," Mosi said quickly, eager to help. "Great," Kwesi said, standing and stretching. "I'll handle morale." "You'll handle carrying whatever we can't fit in our bags," Kia corrected, smirking. Kwesi raised his hands in mock surrender. "Fine, fine. Pack, mule, it is." Despite the levity, a palpable tension lingered in the air as hours later they reconvened at the edge of the village, their supplies packed into worn satchels and water containers strapped to their backs. Zahara inspected each bag with a critical eye, double-checking the provisions and rearranging items to maximize efficiency. Kwesi leaned against the tree, spinning his walking stick idly. "Are we ready yet, oh fearless leader?" "Almost," Zahara muttered, glaring at him. Kia adjusted the strap of her bag, glancing at Mosi, who was fussing with the talisman. "Are you okay?" she asked quietly. Mosi nodded, though his hands trembled slightly as he tucked the talisman into his tunic. "Just nervous." Kia placed a hand on his shoulder. "We'll be okay. We have each other." Mosi didn't respond, but the faint smile on his face suggested he appreciated the reassurance. Zahara stood, brushing dust off her hands. "Everything's ready. If we're doing this, we need to leave now. The desert's only going to get hotter as the day goes on." Kia nodded, looking at the others. "This is it. Are we all in?" Kwesi grinned. "Why not? Dying of thirst in the desert sounds more fun than sitting around here." Zahara rolled her eyes but nodded. Mosi hesitated, then took a deep breath and stepped closer to his sister. "I'm in." Kia smiled, though the weight of their mission pressed heavily on her. "Let's go." With the talisman glowing faintly in the lead, the group set off toward the horizon, the sprawling savanna giving way to the arid expanse of the desert. Each step felt like crossing an invisible line, a boundary between the life they'd always known and the uncertain path that lay ahead. The journey had begun. The desert stretched endlessly before them, a sea of golden sand and jagged stone, broken only by the occasional scraggly bush. The heat was oppressive, the sun beating down on their heads with a relentless intensity. Each step sent up small clouds of dust, and the silence was so absolute that even their labored breathing sounded deafening. Kia led the group, the talisman's faint glow barely visible beneath her tunic. She could feel its steady pulse against her chest, a constant reminder of the path they had chosen. "You'd think the spirits could have given us something to block the sun," Kwesi muttered, using his walking stick to steady himself as he trudged through the sand. "Like a cloud, or maybe some shade. You know, as a sign of encouragement." "Would you rather they gave us more riddles to solve?" Zahara shot back, her tone dry as the air around them. Kwesi smirked. "Depends. Are the riddles easier than walking through this inferno?" Mosi let out a soft chuckle, but his usual nervous energy seemed muted by the weight of the journey. He walked close to Kia, his small frame dwarfed by the satchel slung over his shoulder. "How much farther do you think it is?" he asked, glancing up at his sister. Kia squinted at the horizon, where the heat shimmered like a mirage. "The map says it's just past the southern hills," she said. "Maybe a day's walk if we keep moving." Zahara frowned. "A day's walk if we don't get lost. Or if we don't collapse from dehydration first." "We're not getting lost," Kia said firmly, tapping the talisman. "This will lead us." Zahara didn't look convinced, but she didn't argue. The sun was high overhead when they stopped to rest beneath the sparse shade of a lone acacia tree. Zahara passed around the water containers, her expression stern as she measured each person's share. "Small sips," she instructed, her voice brooking no argument. "We don't know how long this has to last." Kwesi took his ration with a dramatic sigh. "Ah, the sweet taste of sand-filtered water. Delicious." Kia ignored him, her eyes scanning the horizon. The hills were closer now, their jagged peaks rising like jaguar teeth against the sky. But the journey had already begun to take its toll. Her legs ached, her mouth was dry, and the talisman's glow felt heavier than before, as if it were absorbing the weight of the sun. "We should keep moving," she said, standing and brushing sand from her clothes. "Already?" Kwesi groaned, leaning heavily on his walking stick. "You're really embracing this fearless leader thing, aren't you?" Do you want to sleep out here under the stars with whatever else is crawling around? Kia shot back. Good point, Kwesi muttered, hauling himself to his feet. As the day wore on, the terrain grew harsher, the sand giving way to uneven ground littered with sharp rocks. The hills loomed closer, their shadows stretching long and thin as the sun began to dip toward the horizon. The talisman's hum grew stronger, its glow visible even in the fading light. Kia tightened her grip on it, her resolve hardening. "This way," she said, gesturing toward a narrow pass between two rocky outcroppings. The group followed, their movements slower now, weighed down by exhaustion. The pass opened into a wide, rocky plateau. The air was cooler here, the wind picking up and whistling through the crevices in the stone. For the first time since they'd left Jeluma, the silence was broken by something other than their own footsteps. Kia felt a chill run down her spine as the wind carried a faint sound, low and rhythmic, like distant drums. "Do you hear that?" Mosi asked, his voice barely above a whisper. Kia nodded, her eyes scanning the shadows that pooled between the rocks. The sound grew louder, more distinct, and a dark shape emerged from the far end of the plateau. The figure was cloaked in shadow, its form shifting and indistinct, like smoke caught in the wind. Its eyes glowed faintly, twin pinpricks of red light that burned in the fading dusk. The group froze, their breaths caught in their throats. "What is that?" Kwesi whispered, gripping his walking stick like a weapon. "Not friendly," Zahara muttered, her hands moving instinctively to the small pouch of herbs at her waist. The figure moved closer, its steps eerily silent despite the rough ground. Kia tightened her grip on the talisman, which pulsed with an urgent energy. "Stay behind me," she said, stepping forward. "Kia, what are you doing?" Mosi hissed, grabbing her arm. "It's the talisman," she said. "It's reacting to it. Maybe it knows what to do." The figure stopped a few paces away, its shadowy form rippling like water. It raised an arm, or what might have been an arm, and pointed directly at Kia. "You do not belong here," it said, its voice low and echoing, like many voices speaking in unison. "We're not here to fight," Kia said, her voice steady despite the pounding of her heart. "We're here to fix what was broken, to bring back the Rainstone." The figure tilted its head, as if considering her words. "The Rainstone is not yours to take." "It's not Ndulu's either," Kia shot back. At the mention of the witch's name, the figure shuddered, its form flickering like a dying flame. "You tread a dangerous path, child," it said. "Turn back, or the shadows will consume you." Kia's jaw tightened. "We're not turning back." The figure was silent for a moment, then dissolved into the wind, leaving behind only the faint echo of its warning. The group stood in stunned silence, the weight of the encounter settling over them like a heavy cloak. "We should move," Zahara said finally, her voice strained. "Now!" Kia nodded, her grip on the talisman tightening as they pressed on toward the hills. Whatever lay ahead, there was no turning back now. Chapter 3. Forming the group. The rocky plateau fell behind them as the group pressed deeper into the desert, their path lit only by the dim glow of the talisman and the pale light of the rising moon. The silence between them was heavy, punctuated only by the crunch of their footsteps on the stony ground. Kia's heart still raced from the encounter with the shadowy figure. Its words echoed in her mind. "Turn back, or the shadows will consume you." "We should talk about what just happened," Mosi said suddenly, his voice cutting through the quiet. "There's nothing to talk about," Kia replied sharply. "It tried to scare us off. It didn't work." "But what if it's right?" Mosi pressed, his hands clutching the straps of his satchel. "What if we're walking straight into a trap?" Kwesi snorted, his tone light but strained. "Did you miss the part where we don't have a choice? Jeluma's already trapped. At least this way we might have a shot at breaking out." Mosi frowned, but didn't argue. Zahara slowed her pace, glancing at Kia. "That thing wasn't just a warning," she said. "It was a threat. We need to be smarter about this. If the shadows are protecting the Rainstone, we can't just charge in blindly." "I'm not blind," Kia snapped, her voice harsher than she intended. "The Talisman is guiding us. It wouldn't lead us into something we can't handle." Zahara's eyebrows rose, but she said nothing, falling back into step with the others. Hours passed as the group trekked through the desert, the landscape shifting from rocky plateaus to rolling dunes that seemed to stretch endlessly in every direction. The moon hung high overhead, casting faint silver light on the sands. The Talisman's glow grew brighter, its hum filling the stillness. Kia felt a strange pull in her chest, as if the artifact were urging her forward. "Do you feel that?" she asked, glancing back at the others. Kwesi groaned. "If by feel that you mean my legs slowly turning into sand-filled sticks, then yes." "Not that," Kia said, ignoring his sarcasm. "The Talisman. It's pulling us somewhere." Zahara frowned. "Pulling us where, exactly?" Kia didn't answer, focusing on the sensation. Her feet seemed to move on their own, her steps steady and sure, despite the shifting sands. The group followed her in silence until they crested a dune and stopped abruptly. Below them lay a hidden grove, a circle of lush greenery that seemed impossibly out of place in the barren desert. Tall acacia trees stretched their branches toward the sky, their leaves shimmering faintly in the moonlight. A small pool of water glistened at the grove's center, its surface perfectly still. "What is this place?" Mosi whispered, his wide eyes reflecting the moonlight. "The Talisman led us here," Kia said, descending the dune without hesitation. The others followed reluctantly, their footsteps cautious as they entered the grove. The air here was cooler, almost sweet, and the faint chirping of crickets broke the oppressive silence of the desert. Zahara knelt by the pool, dipping her fingers into the water. "It's fresh," she said, her tone laced with disbelief. Kwesi leaned on his walking stick, surveying the area. "This is either a blessing," he said, "or a trap." Kia ignored him, her gaze sweeping the grove. Something about the place felt alive, as if the trees and the pool were watching them. The Talisman's hum grew louder, its glow intensifying. Kia's pulse quickened. Then she saw it. A pair of golden eyes glinted from the shadows beneath the trees, unblinking and piercing. A low growl rumbled through the grove, deep and resonant, like distant thunder. "Don't move," Kia whispered, holding out a hand to stop the others. The growl grew louder, and the golden eyes emerged from the darkness, followed by a massive form. A lioness stepped into the moonlight, her golden fur shimmering like sunlight on water. Her movements were slow and deliberate, each step exuding power and grace. "That," Kwesi muttered, his voice barely audible, "is definitely a trap." The lioness stopped a few paces from the group, her amber eyes scanning them with an intelligence that sent a shiver down Kia's spine. "Who enters my domain?" the lioness asked, her voice low and commanding. Kia's breath caught. The words hadn't come from the lioness's mouth, but they rang clearly in her mind. We're here to... Mosi began, but Kia cut him off. We're here because the Talisman led us, she said, her voice steady despite the trembling in her hands. We're on a journey to find the Rainstone and restore balance to Jeluma. The lioness tilted her head, her gaze narrowing. The Rainstone is guarded by darkness, she said. A trial not meant for the faint of heart. What makes you believe you are worthy? Kia stepped forward, ignoring the protests of the others. Because we're the only ones willing to try. The lioness's growl deepened, her golden eyes blazing. Courage alone does not make you worthy. If you seek my aid, you must prove your resolve. How? Kia asked, her voice firm. The lioness bared her teeth, a low, rumbling purr escaping her throat. Face your fears, confront your doubts. Only then will I know if you are fit to carry the burden of the Rainstone. The ground beneath them trembled, and the shadows of the grove seemed to stretch and writhe. One by one, the group was enveloped by darkness, each person pulled into their own trial. Kia's surroundings dissolved into blackness, the hum of the talisman fading as a new sound filled the air, the low, mocking laughter of Ndulu. Kia blinked into the darkness, her pulse pounding in her ears. The comforting hum of the talisman was gone, replaced by an eerie silence. Her breath came shallow and fast as she turned in place, trying to make sense of her surroundings. Singa? She called out, her voice echoing faintly in the void. Mosi? Zahara? Kwesi? No one answered. Then came the laughter. A cold, sharp sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere at once. Kia froze, her hands clenching into fists. You think you can lead them? The voice was low and mocking, with a familiar edge that sent a chill down her spine. You think you're strong enough to face what lies ahead? Who's there? Kia demanded, her voice trembling despite her effort to sound brave. The shadows swirled, and a figure emerged, a twisted version of herself, taller and fiercer, with glowing red eyes and a cruel smile. The figure's voice was her own, but distorted, warped by malice. They'll never follow you, the doppelganger sneered, circling her slowly. You're just a child playing at being a hero. You'll fail, and when you do, they'll all suffer for it. Shut up, Kia snapped, her jaw tightening. Why? The figure taunted, its grin widening. You know I'm right. Look at them. Mosi can't even take a step without you holding his hand. Zahara doesn't trust you, and Kwesi. He's just here for the story. They're not a team. They're dead weight. That's not true, Kia said, though her voice wavered. The figure stepped closer, its glowing eyes boring into hers. You're wasting time trying to save people who don't believe in you. Why bother? Leave them behind. Take the talisman. Do it alone. Kia's heart pounded, her thoughts spinning. A part of her wanted to lash out, to deny the figure's words. But another part, smaller, quieter, wondered if it was right. I won't, she said finally, her voice steady. They're my team. I don't need them to believe in me. I just need them to keep going. The doppelganger's smile faltered. And what happens when you fail them? Kia clenched her fists. I won't! The figure stepped back, its form dissolving into wisps of shadow. We'll see, it said, its voice fading as the darkness around Kia lifted. Mosi's trial was quieter, but no less harrowing. He stood in an endless plain of cracked earth, the air heavy with the scent of dust. The horizon stretched out infinitely in every direction, empty and barren. You're not strong enough, a voice whispered, soft and insidious. Mosi turned, but there was no one there. You don't belong here. The voice continued, closer now. You're nothing but a burden. They'd be better off without you. No, Mosi said, his voice trembling. That's not true. A shadowy figure materialized in front of him, shifting and flickering like smoke. It grew taller, broader, until it resembled his sister, Kia, her arms crossed and her eyes cold. You're just slowing us down, the shadow Kia said, her voice sharp. You're always hesitating, always second-guessing yourself. We don't have time for your fears, Mosi. If you can't keep up, you should go back to Jeluma. Mosi's heart ached at the words, even as he told himself they weren't real. I'm not leaving, he said, though his voice cracked. The figure loomed over him. You're not brave enough to stay. Mosi clenched his fists, his small frame trembling. I'm not as brave as Kia, he admitted, or as strong as Zahara, or as clever as Kwesi, but I'm still here. The figure wavered, its form flickering like a dying flame. I'm here, Mosi said again, his voice growing stronger. And I'm not going anywhere. The shadow dissolved, the cracked earth fading into darkness. Each member of the group faced their own trial. Zahara's fear of losing control, Kwesi's doubt in his worth, and emerged shaken but resolute. When the darkness lifted, they found themselves back in the grove, the moonlight bathing the trees in a silvery glow. The lioness, Singa, sat at the edge of the pool, her golden eyes watching them with quiet intensity. You have faced your fears, she said, her voice low and measured. And yet, you still stand. That is the first step toward true courage. Kia stepped forward, her legs unsteady but her resolve firm. Does that mean you'll help us? Singa regarded her for a long moment, then nodded. I will walk with you on this path, she said. But know this, the trials you have faced tonight are only the beginning. The shadows will not rest until the Rainstone is returned or destroyed. We're ready, Kia said, her voice steady. Singa's gaze lingered on her, a faint smile curling at the edge of her mouth. We shall see. With that, she rose and began to lead them out of the grove, her golden fur glowing faintly in the moonlight. The group followed, their steps heavier, but their bond stronger. Together they left the grove behind, the desert stretching before them like a vast, untamed horizon. The desert felt less oppressive now, with Singa padding silently beside them, her powerful frame radiating calm strength. The group moved in her shadow, the lioness leading the way across the endless expanse of sand and rock. Kia walked near the front, her hand resting on the talisman. The steady pulse of its energy filled her with a strange mixture of confidence and unease. Behind her, Mosi stayed close, his gaze darting between the horizon and the lioness, as if still unsure whether Singa was friend or foe. The sun was beginning to sink, painting the dunes in shades of orange and gold. The wind picked up, carrying grains of sand that stung their faces and made conversation difficult. Finally, Kwesi broke the silence. Okay, he said, wiping sweat from his brow. I have a very important question for everyone. Kia glanced over her shoulder. Oh, Kwesi grinned. What's the first thing you're going to eat when we save the village and the rains come back? Personally, I'm thinking honey cakes. Lots of honey cakes. Zahara rolled her eyes. We're on a life-or-death mission. And you're thinking about dessert? Of course I am, Kwesi replied, twirling his walking stick. It's called motivation, Zahara. You should try it sometime. Zahara snorted but didn't respond. "I'd want mangoes," Mosi said quietly, surprising everyone. "Big, ripe ones, the kind that drip juice everywhere when you bite into them." Kwesi nodded approvingly. "Excellent choice, little man. Mangoes are a classic." "What about you, Kia?" Mosi asked, looking up at his sister. Kia hesitated, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "I don't know," she said finally. "I guess I haven't thought about it." Kwesi raised an eyebrow. "Not even a guess? Come on, Kia. Everyone has a favorite food." Kia sighed, a faint smile tugging at the corner of her mouth. "Fine. Roasted yams. The kind grandmother used to make with spices and honey." Kwesi grinned. "Now we're getting somewhere." "What about you, Zahara?" Mosi asked. Zahara didn't answer right away. Her gaze was distant, her expression thoughtful. "I guess a fresh meal shared with my family," she said quietly. "It doesn't matter what it is." The group fell silent for a moment, the weight of her words sinking in. "That's a good answer," Kwesi said softly, his usual humor replaced by sincerity. Singer, who had been silent until now, let out a low, rumbling purr that sounded almost like approval. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the group stopped to make camp in the shadow of a large rock formation. The wind had grown stronger, whipping through the dunes and carrying a faint, metallic scent. Zahara unpacked the meager supplies they had brought, carefully dividing the rations, while Kwesi used his walking stick to draw a crude map of their progress in the sand. Mosi sat near Singer, his eyes darting nervously to the lioness. "Why are you helping us?" he asked suddenly, his voice barely audible over the wind. Singer turned her golden eyes on him, her gaze unreadable. "Because your purpose aligns with mine," she said simply. "But why do you care about the Rainstone?" Mosi pressed. Singer's tail flicked, her gaze shifting to the horizon. "Because the Rainstone is tied to the balance of all things. Its absence weakens not just your village, but the land itself. Restoring it will benefit us all." Mosi nodded slowly, though he didn't seem entirely satisfied with the answer. Later, as the group huddled around a small fire Zahara had managed to build, the wind picked up again, carrying with it a strange sound, a distant rhythmic thrum that seemed to vibrate in the air. "What is that?" Kwesi asked, his voice low. Kia stood, her hand instinctively reaching for the talisman. The glow beneath her tunic flared slightly, pulsing in time with the sound. "It's coming from over there," she said, pointing toward the dark horizon. Singer rose to her feet, her ears twitching. "A storm is brewing," she said, her voice calm but firm. "But it is no ordinary storm." The group exchanged uneasy glances. "Should we move?" Mosi asked. Singer shook her head. "No, you must face what comes." The rhythmic sound grew louder, and the wind began to howl, carrying sand that danced like smoke in the firelight. The group huddled closer, their eyes fixed on the horizon, as a strange glow began to spread across the sky. Kia tightened her grip on the talisman, her heart pounding. Whatever was coming, she knew it would be their next test. The wind roared like a living thing, tearing through the dunes with an intensity that made the sand feel like needles against their skin. The faint glow on the horizon grew brighter, shifting between deep purple and blood red, casting eerie shadows across the desert. Kaya clutched the talisman tightly, its hum vibrating in her hand. The light it emitted pulsed in rhythm with the storm's strange, rhythmic sound, as though it was alive and responding to the chaos around them. "Everyone stay close!" she shouted over the howling wind. The group huddled together near the rock formation, Singa standing protectively at the edge of their circle. Her golden eyes scanned the horizon, her fur bristling as the storm drew closer. "This isn't natural," Zahara said, her voice strained. She shielded her face with her arm, her braided tattoos catching the flickering light. "It's them," Mosi said, his voice shaking. "The shadows. They're coming for us." Kwesi tightened his grip on his walking stick, his usual humor replaced by grim determination. "Well, that's just perfect. First shadows, now storms. What's next? A giant sand monster." As if in response, the wind shifted, carrying with it an ear-piercing shriek that made Kia's blood run cold. "There's something out there," she said, scanning the dunes. The shadows began to move, writhing and twisting like living smoke. Shapes emerged from the storm, dark, hulking creatures with glowing red eyes and jagged forms that seemed to ripple and shift as they moved. The group froze, their breaths caught in their throats. "They're testing us," Singa growled, her voice low and steady. "Show them your strength, or they will destroy you." "Great advice," Kwesi muttered. "How exactly do we do that?" The first creature lunged toward them, its massive, shadowy form moving with unnatural speed. Singa leapt forward, her golden fur glowing faintly as she collided with the beast. Her claws tore through its smoky form, scattering it into wisps of darkness that dissolved into the wind. "Stay behind me!" she commanded, her voice echoing with authority. But the storm was relentless. More creatures emerged, their movements fluid and erratic, their red eyes burning with malice. "Zahara! Get the fire going again!" Kia shouted. "Kwesi! Help her! Mosi! Stay close to me!" Zahara dropped to her knees, shielding the embers of their dying fire from the wind. Kwesi crouched beside her, using his walking stick to build a makeshift windbreak out of loose rocks. Mosi clung to Kia's side, his eyes darting between the talisman and the advancing creatures. "What do we do?" he whispered. Kia tightened her grip on the talisman. "We fight!" One of the creatures lunged at them, its clawed limbs reaching for Mosi. Without thinking, Kia raised the talisman. Its light flared, a brilliant burst of golden energy that struck the shadow, forcing it back with a screech. Mosi stared at her, his eyes wide. "How did you do that?" "I don't know," Kia admitted, her heart pounding. Another creature charged, and she raised the talisman again. This time, the light formed a barrier between them, holding the shadow at bay. Singa leapt into the fray, her claws glowing with the same golden light as the talisman. She tore through the creatures with precision and ferocity, her movements a blur of power and grace. "Focus on the light!" Singa called to Kia. "It is your strength." By the time the storm began to subside, the group was exhausted, their limbs trembling with adrenaline and fear. The shadowy creatures dissolved into the air, their shrieks fading into silence as the wind died down. Kia lowered the talisman, its glow dimming as the danger passed. She sank to her knees, her breath coming in ragged gasps. "You did well," Singa said, padding over to her. The lioness's golden fur was streaked with sand, but her eyes were calm and steady. "We barely made it," Kia said, shaking her head. "And yet you did," Singa replied. "You stood together. That is your greatest strength." The others gathered around, their expressions a mix of relief and exhaustion. Zahara dusted sand from her arms, her tattoos glinting faintly in the moonlight. Kwesi leaned heavily on his walking stick, his usual grin replaced by a weary smirk. "Well, he said. "That was the worst storm I've ever been in. And I once got caught in a swarm of angry locusts. So that's saying something." Mosi sat beside Kia, his hands still trembling. "Do you think it'll come back?" he asked quietly. Kia glanced at the horizon, where the storm had disappeared as suddenly as it had arrived. "I don't know," she admitted. Singa's gaze turned toward the sky, her expression unreadable. "The shadows are testing you," she said. "But they are not your only challenge. The path ahead will demand more of you than strength alone." "What does that mean?" Zahara asked, her brow furrowing. Singa didn't answer. Instead, she padded toward the edge of the camp, her tail swishing lightly in the wind. "Rest now," she said. "You'll need it." The group exchanged uneasy glances but said nothing, too tired to argue. As they settled down for the night, the faint hum of the talisman returned, a steady rhythm that seemed to promise both comfort and warning. Kia lay awake for a long time, staring at the stars and wondering what the next trial would bring. The desert was still. The wind had died, leaving the sands undisturbed, as if the storm had never happened. The faint hum of the talisman resonated softly in the pre-dawn quiet, its glow dim but constant. Kia sat a short distance from the others, her knees drawn up to her chest. The events of the night replayed in her mind. The storm, the shadows, the way the talisman had responded to her instinctively. It felt like too much, too fast. Her gaze drifted toward the others. Kwesi was sprawled out on his back, his walking stick resting beside him. Zahara sat cross-legged, inspecting her small collection of herbs with meticulous care. And Mosi. Kia's eyes softened as she watched her brother. He was crouched near the remains of the fire, turning over a smooth stone in his hands, his face calm but thoughtful. She stood and walked over to him, lowering herself to sit beside him in the sand. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. Mosi shook his head, his fingers tracing the stone's surface. "I keep thinking about the storm," he said quietly, "and the shadows." Kia sighed. "Me too." "You weren't scared," Mosi said, glancing up at her. Kia frowned. "Of course I was. I just didn't let it stop me." Mosi hesitated, then held up the stone. "I wasn't scared either," he said, his voice almost shy. "Not like I thought I would be. When that creature came at us, I wanted to run. But then I saw you, and I didn't feel so small anymore." Kia's chest tightened. She reached out and ruffled his hair, earning a small, reluctant smile from her brother. "You're not small, Mosi," she said. "You're braver than you think." The first rays of dawn painted the sky in soft hues of pink and orange, casting long shadows across the desert. The group stirred one by one, packing their meager supplies and brushing sand from their clothes. Singa sat at the edge of the camp, her golden fur glowing faintly in the morning light. She watched the horizon with an intensity that made Kia wonder what the lioness was thinking. "Are we ready to move?" Zahara asked, adjusting the strap of her satchel. "As ready as we'll ever be," Kwesi said, stifling a yawn, though a hearty breakfast wouldn't hurt. "You'll have to settle for another handful of dried figs," Zahara said dryly, tossing him a small bundle. Kwesi caught it with a grin. "Ah, my favorite desert delicacy." Kia stepped forward, the talisman resting against her chest. "Where to next?" Singa rose gracefully to her feet, her amber eyes meeting Kia's. "The storm was a test, and you endured it. Now the talisman will guide us to the next marker. Marker? Mosi asked, tilting his head. There are signs hidden in the land, Singa explained. Clues left by those who came before. If we are to reach the library of Umoya, we must follow them. Great, Kwesi muttered. More riddles. Kia ignored him, her focus on the talisman. She closed her eyes, willing it to respond. The faint hum grew louder, the light flaring briefly before settling into a steady pulse. It's pulling us that way, she said, pointing toward a distant ridge. Singa nodded. Then we follow. The journey to the ridge was quieter than before, the group subdued but more unified after the night's events. The sun rose higher, its heat building, but the breeze that carried over the dunes was cool and refreshing, as if the desert itself were granting them a reprieve. When they reached the ridge, Kia stopped, her breath catching at what lay below. A series of jagged rock formations jutted from the sand, their surfaces etched with strange, glowing symbols. The symbols pulsed faintly, like the talisman, and seemed to form a winding path leading deeper into the desert. What is this place? Zahara asked, her voice hushed. A path, Singa said simply. One few have walked and fewer have returned from. Comforting, Kwesi said, though there was a note of genuine awe in his voice. Kia stepped closer, her fingers brushing one of the symbols. The moment she touched it, the talisman flared, and a faint voice whispered in her mind. You are closer, but the journey has only begun. Follow the signs. Prove your worth. She pulled her hand back, her heart pounding. What happened? Mosi asked, noticing her reaction. Nothing, Kia said quickly. She turned to the others, her expression firm. Let's keep moving. As the group descended into the path of symbols, the air seemed to hum with unseen energy. Kia felt the weight of their mission pressing more heavily on her shoulders, but she pushed forward, each step fueled by the knowledge that turning back was no longer an option. They were heading deeper into the unknown, and whatever waited ahead, they would face it together. Chapter 4. The Library of Umoya. The path of glowing symbols led the group through twisting canyons and across barren plains, the signs growing brighter as they progressed. The talisman's hum remained steady, a guiding rhythm that seemed to keep their steps in sync. By midday, the heat had become almost unbearable. The sun beat down on their heads, and even Singa, with her golden fur, seemed to move slower than usual. Zahara doled out water sparingly, her sharp eyes scanning the horizon for any signs of shelter. How much, father? Mosi asked, his voice hoarse from the dry air. Kia adjusted the talisman against her chest, squinting at the shimmering dunes ahead. We're close, she said, though she wasn't entirely sure. Kwesi stumbled beside them, his walking stick digging into the sand with each step. If by close, you mean we're about to collapse into a pile of sunburned bones, then yes, we're definitely close. Stop complaining, Zahara said, though there was no heat in her words. We'll rest as soon as we find shade. As the afternoon wore on, the glowing symbols began to shift, converging into a single point on the horizon. Kia's heart quickened as the outline of a massive sandstone structure came into view. The Library of Umoya rose from the desert like a monolith, its walls carved directly into a towering cliff. Its surface was covered in intricate hieroglyphs that shimmered faintly, as though alive. The group stopped at the base of the structure, their exhaustion momentarily forgotten as they took in the sight. This is it, Kia said, her voice filled with awe. Kwesi let out a low whistle. Okay, I'll admit this was worth the walk. What do you think's inside? Treasure? Ancient curses? A nice cold bath? Answers, Singer said firmly, padding forward. But they will not come easily. The entrance to the library was flanked by 2 massive owl statues, their jeweled eyes glinting in the fading sunlight. As the group approached, the ground beneath them trembled, and the statues began to shift. The owls turned their heads in unison, their jeweled eyes locking onto the group. When they spoke, their voices were deep and resonant, like the tolling of distant bells. Who dares disturb the sanctity of Umoya's knowledge? Kia stepped forward, clutching the talisman. We're here to find the Rainstone, she said. The talisman led us. The owls studied her for a moment, their jeweled eyes flickering. The Rainstone is not a prize to be taken, one said. Nor is it a path free of peril, the other added. We're not afraid of peril, Kwesi said, leaning on his walking stick. We've come this far, haven't we? The owls ignored him, their attention fixed on Kia. To enter, you must prove your worth, they said in unison. Answer our riddles, or be cast into the sands. The group exchanged uneasy glances. Let's hear them, Kia said, her voice steady, despite the knot in her stomach. The first owl's jeweled eyes glowed brighter as it spoke. I have cities, but no houses. I have mountains, but no trees. I have water, but no fish. What am I? Kia frowned, her mind racing. Zahara stepped closer, her expression thoughtful. A map, Zahara said finally. The owl's eyes dimmed slightly, and it nodded. You may proceed to the second riddle. The second owl turned its head, its jeweled eyes blazing. The more you take, the more you leave behind. What am I? This time it was Mosi who spoke, his voice quiet but sure. Footsteps. The second owl nodded, its gaze softening. Very well, it said. You may enter. The ground rumbled as the massive stone doors of the library slid open, revealing a narrow staircase leading into the depths of the cliff. That wasn't so bad, Kwesi said, grinning. The first owl turned its head toward him, its voice low and ominous. Do not mistake entry for safety, mortal. The knowledge you seek comes at a price. Kwesi's grin faded. Right, got it. No jokes in the creepy magic library. Inside, the air was cool and dry, carrying the faint scent of parchment and stone. The walls of the library were lined with shelves carved directly into the rock, each one filled with ancient scrolls and tomes. Glowing hieroglyphs danced along the walls, shifting and rearranging as the group passed. The talisman's hum grew louder, guiding them deeper into the library. This place is incredible, Zahara said, her voice hushed. It's like it's alive, Mosi added, his wide eyes scanning the glowing symbols. Kia's gaze was drawn to a central chamber where a massive stone pedestal stood, its surface etched with the same symbols as the talisman. This is it, she said, stepping forward. As she placed the talisman on the pedestal, the symbols flared to life, and a cascade of light filled the chamber. Images flickered in the air, scenes of Jeluma's past, the Rainstone shining brightly at the center of the village. The vision shifted, showing Ndulu stealing the Rainstone and fleeing into the darkness. The final image lingered. The Rainstone, hidden deep within the cave of eternal shadows, surrounded by writhing tendrils of darkness. That's where it is, Kia said, her voice filled with determination. But how do we get there? Zahara asked. The pedestal's light dimmed, revealing a series of glowing symbols pointing toward a map etched into the wall. The path was marked with 3 distinct trials, each represented by a different element: wind, earth, and fire. Singer stepped forward, her golden eyes narrowing. "These are the elemental trials," she said. "They will test your resolve, your unity, and your connection to the spirits." Kia nodded, her jaw set. "We'll face them, together." The group exchanged looks, a mix of determination and unease in their eyes. "Then we have our path," Singer said. "But be warned, the trials will demand everything you have, and if you falter, the shadows will claim you." The group exited the library as the sun began to set, the desert bathed in hues of crimson and gold. As they set off toward the first trial, Kia felt the weight of the talisman grow heavier against her chest. The path ahead was clear, but the challenges they faced would test them in ways they couldn't yet imagine. And the shadows were watching. Chapter 5. Nature's Trials. The desert winds grew colder as the group followed the map's markings, their path winding between jagged rocks and shifting dunes. The talisman pulsed faintly against Kia's chest, guiding them toward the first trial. "The trial of wind," Singer said, her golden eyes fixed on the horizon. "Wind doesn't sound so bad," Kwesi muttered, gripping his walking stick. "Better than fire, right?" Zahara shot him a look. "I'd keep quiet if I were you. The last thing we need is you jinxing us." Mosi stayed close to Kia, his steps cautious as they climbed a steep ridge. When they reached the top, the landscape before them shifted dramatically. The sands below seemed to move of their own accord, swirling in tight, violent spirals. The air was alive with the sound of howling winds, their force so strong that even from a distance, the group could feel their power. "That's a little more than I expected," Kwesi said, his earlier bravado fading. Kia adjusted the talisman and took a deep breath. "We can handle this," she said, more to herself than anyone else. "How?" Mosi asked, his voice trembling. Singer stepped forward, her tail flicking. "The trial of wind will test your balance, not just of body, but of mind and spirit. The sands will shift beneath your feet. The winds will seek to throw you off course. You must find your center and keep moving forward." "Easy enough," Kwesi said, though his grin was forced. "Speak for yourself," Zahara muttered, adjusting her satchel. Kia turned to the group, her gaze steady. "We stick together," she said. "No one gets left behind." Singer inclined her head, then let the trial begin. The moment they stepped into the swirling sands, the wind hit them like a physical force, throwing them off balance. Kia stumbled but managed to catch herself, shielding her face as grains of sand lashed at her skin. "Stay close," she shouted, her voice barely audible over the howling wind. The group huddled together, their movements slow and deliberate as they navigated the shifting terrain. The ground beneath their feet seemed to twist and buckle, the sand behaving more like liquid than solid earth. "This is impossible," Kwesi yelled, his walking stick sinking deep into the sand. "Keep moving," Kia shouted back. The talisman's light flared, cutting through the storm like a beacon. Kia gripped it tightly, using its glow to guide them forward. Zahara took the lead beside her, her movements careful but purposeful. "Watch your footing," she said, her voice calm despite the chaos around them. Mosi lagged behind, his smaller frame struggling against the force of the wind. When he stumbled, Kwesi caught his arm, pulling him upright. "Don't quit on me, little man," Kwesi said, his grin returning despite the strain in his voice. Mosi nodded, his resolve hardening. As they pushed deeper into the trial, The winds grew stronger, whipping around them in furious spirals. The air seemed to hum with energy, and Kia felt the talisman grow warmer against her chest. The path ahead was marked by a series of stone pillars, their surfaces etched with glowing symbols. Each pillar pulsed faintly, their light flickering like candles in the storm. "That must be the way through!" Kia shouted, pointing to the nearest pillar. The group moved toward it, their steps slow and deliberate. When they reached the pillar, the symbols flared, and the winds around them seemed to subside slightly. "We need to activate them," Zahara said, studying the markings. "Each one weakens the storm." "Then let's hurry," Kwesi said, glancing nervously at the swirling sands. One by one, the group moved from pillar to pillar, activating the symbols and carving a path through the storm. Each step forward felt like a victory, the winds gradually lessening as they worked together. When they reached the final pillar, the storm ceased entirely, leaving the desert silent and still. "We did it!" Mosi said, his voice filled with relief. "Of course we did," Kwesi said, though he leaned heavily on his walking stick, his exhaustion evident. Kia smiled faintly, her chest heaving as she caught her breath. "One trial down," she said. "2 to go." Singa padded forward, her golden fur unruffled. "The trial of wind has shown you the importance of balance and unity," she said. "The next trial will demand even more of you." The group pressed on, their spirits lifted slightly by their success. The map's markings led them to a rocky canyon, its walls towering high above them. The air here was cool and still, a stark contrast to the chaos of the previous trial. "This must be the trial of Earth," Zahara said, her gaze scanning the canyon walls. "Great," Kwesi muttered. "What's it going to do? Bury us alive?" As if in response, the ground beneath their feet began to tremble. Cracks spiderwebbed across the canyon floor, and massive stone slabs shifted, forming a jagged, uneven path. Singa's voice was calm, but firm. "The trial of Earth will test your stability and strength. The path will not remain steady, and the stones will seek to unbalance you. You must trust yourselves and each other to make it through." "More teamwork," Kwesi said, though his tone lacked its usual humor. "Let's move," Kia said, leading the way. The path was treacherous, the stones shifting and crumbling beneath their feet. Zahara took the lead, her movements deliberate and precise, while Kwesi stayed near Mosi, offering him support when the smaller boy faltered. "Careful!" Zahara called, as a stone slab tilted dangerously beneath her. Kia adjusted her footing, her heart pounding as she watched the ground shift like a living thing. The talisman's hum grew louder, its glow steady and reassuring. At one point, a large section of the path crumbled entirely, leaving a wide gap between them and the next stable platform. "Now what?" Kwesi asked, his grip on his walking stick tightening. Kia stepped forward, the talisman pulsing in her hand. "We jump," she said. "Are you serious?" Kwesi replied, his eyes wide. "We don't have a choice," Kia said firmly. One by one, they leapt across the gap, the talisman's glow lighting their way. When it was Mosi's turn, he hesitated, his eyes fixed on the chasm below. "You can do this," Kia said, her voice steady. "Trust me." Mosi nodded, his fear giving way to determination. With a deep breath, he jumped, landing safely on the other side with Kia's help. The group pressed on, the shifting stones testing their resolve at every turn. When they finally emerged from the canyon, their relief was palpable. "2 down," Kia said, her voice filled with determination. Singa nodded, her gaze fixed on the horizon. The final trial awaits, she said. "But it will be the most difficult yet." The group exchanged weary but resolute looks, ready to face whatever came next. Chapter 6. The Lioness Protector. The air grew warmer as the group descended from the canyon. The Talisman's hum, which had been a steady comfort throughout their journey, now pulsed with an intensity that made Kia's chest ache. "Feels like we're walking into an oven," Kwesi muttered, wiping sweat from his brow. "I'm guessing this is the part where the fire shows up." Zahara glanced at the horizon, where faint tendrils of smoke curled upward into the clear blue sky. "Looks like it," she said grimly. Mosi adjusted the strap of his satchel, his gaze fixed on the faint glow ahead. "Do you think it's real fire?" Singer padded ahead of the group, her golden fur catching the sunlight. "The trial of fire is not just about flames," she said. "It is a test of your endurance, your courage, and your ability to trust in the unknown. To succeed, you must be willing to face what you fear most and emerge stronger." "Great," Kwesi muttered. "So basically, we're walking into a nightmare." "More like a forge," Singer corrected, her voice calm. "Fire tempers metal, making it stronger. This trial will do the same for you, if you let it." Kia squared her shoulders, her grip tightening on the talisman. "Then let's do this." The path led them to a vast open plain covered in blackened rock. Heat waves shimmered in the air, and the ground beneath their feet radiated warmth. In the distance, a massive archway carved from molten stone loomed, its edges glowing faintly as if still aflame. As they approached, the archway came alive, flames licking up its surface and forming the shape of a roaring lion's head. A deep, resonant voice filled the air. "Only the worthy may pass, face the fire within, or be consumed by it." The flames roared higher, and a wall of fire erupted across the archway, blocking their path. "How are we supposed to get through that?" Zahara asked, shielding her face from the heat. Singer stepped forward, her golden eyes fixed on the flames. "The fire is not your enemy," she said. "It is a reflection of your will. Each of you must walk through it with purpose and trust. Only then will it part for you." "Trust," Kwesi muttered, staring at the roaring flames. "Easier said than done." Kia turned to the group, her expression resolute. "We've come this far. We can do this. Just focus on what's waiting on the other side." One by one, they stepped forward. Mosi went first, his small frame trembling as he approached the wall of fire. He hesitated, his wide eyes reflecting the flames. "You've got this," Kia called from behind him. Taking a deep breath, Mosi stepped into the fire. For a moment, the flames seemed to engulf him, their heat pressing against his skin. But as he moved forward, they parted, creating a narrow path that led to the other side. "I did it!" Mosi shouted, his voice filled with awe. Zahara followed, her movements deliberate and steady. The flames flickered as she passed, testing her resolve, but she never faltered. Kwesi was next, his usual humor replaced by a rare seriousness. He muttered something under his breath, perhaps a story to distract himself, before stepping into the fire. The flames flared around him, but he pushed forward, emerging on the other side with a triumphant grin. Kia stepped up to the wall, the talisman pulsing against her chest. She glanced at Singer, who watched her with an expression that was almost expectant. "Your turn," Kia said. Singer nodded, her golden eyes gleaming. "Together," she said. Kia took a deep breath and stepped into the flames, Singer moving beside her. The heat was overwhelming, and for a moment, fear clawed at her chest. But the talisman flared, its light cutting through the fire like a shield. As they emerged on the other side, Kia felt a rush of relief, and something else. The talisman's hum had changed, growing deeper and more resonant, as if it were alive. "You have passed the trial of fire," Singer said, her voice filled with quiet pride. "Your bond with the spirits grows stronger." Kia turned to the others, who were catching their breath and wiping sweat from their faces. Despite their exhaustion, there was a sense of triumph in the air. "We did it," Zahara said, her tone soft but firm. Kwesi grinned, leaning on his walking stick. "3 trials down. Does this mean we're officially heroes now?" "Not yet," Singer said, her gaze fixed on the horizon. "The true test lies ahead. But you are ready." As the group set off once more, the air felt lighter, as though the trials had lifted some invisible weight from their shoulders. The talisman's glow was brighter now, its hum a steady reminder of their growing connection to the spirits. Kia walked beside Singer, her thoughts turning to the challenges they had faced. "Why are you helping us?" she asked quietly. "You've already done so much. Why risk more?" Singer's gaze softened, her steps steady. "Because the Rainstone is not just your village's hope. It is a symbol of balance for the land itself. If it remains lost, the drought will spread, and the shadows will consume everything. I have guarded this balance for many years, and now it is your turn to carry that burden." Kia nodded, the weight of Singer's words settling over her. "We won't let you down," she said. Singer's golden eyes met hers, a faint smile curling at the edges of her mouth. "I know you won't." As the sun dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in hues of crimson and gold, the group set up camp for the night. The glow of the talisman bathed them in soft light, a constant reminder of the path they had chosen. Tomorrow, they would face the cave of eternal shadows and the final battle against Ndulu. But for now, they rested, their bond stronger than ever, ready to face whatever lay ahead. Chapter 7. The Cave of Eternal Shadows. The desert stretched out behind them like a vast golden sea as the group approached the dark maw of the Cave of Eternal Shadows. The entrance loomed before them, jagged and foreboding, like the open jaws of some ancient beast. A faint, chilling wind blew from within, carrying with it the scent of damp stone and decay. The talisman pulsed against Kia's chest, its light dim but steady, as if bracing itself for what lay ahead. "So, this is it," Kwesi said, gripping his walking stick tightly. "The big, scary cave where all the bad things happen." "Doesn't look so bad," Zahara said, though her voice betrayed her unease. "It's worse than it looks," Singer said, her golden eyes fixed on the entrance. "The shadows inside will not merely attack your bodies. They will seek to break your minds, your spirits. Stay close, and do not trust what you see." Mosi swallowed hard, his gaze darting nervously between the cave and the others. "What if we don't see anything? What if it's too dark?" Singer glanced at him, her tone gentle but firm. "The talisman will guide you. Trust its light, and trust yourselves." Kia squared her shoulders, stepping forward. "Let's go." But before they could enter, the shadows surged. The ground beneath their feet trembled as dark forms erupted from the sand, twisting and writhing like smoke given shape. Ndulu's minions emerged, tall, hulking figures with glowing red eyes and clawed hands that seemed to scrape the very air. The group froze as the creatures advanced, their growls low and guttural. "Stay together!" Kia shouted, raising the talisman. Its light flared, pushing back the nearest shadows. Singer leapt forward with a ferocious roar, her claws glowing with the same golden energy as the talisman. She tore through one of the creatures, scattering it into wisps of darkness. Kwesi swung his walking stick with surprising force, striking one of the smaller creatures. "Okay, this is officially the worst idea we've ever had," he shouted, his voice strained. Zahara pulled a pouch from her satchel, throwing a handful of powdered herbs into the air. The mixture ignited on contact, creating a burst of light that sent several creatures retreating. "Focus on the entrance," she yelled. "We need to get inside." Mosi, however, hesitated, his feet rooted to the ground. The chaos around him seemed to blur as his eyes locked onto one of the shadow creatures, a massive, wolf-like beast with glowing red eyes. It growled, its movements slow and deliberate, as if savoring his fear. "Mosi!" Kia shouted, her voice cutting through the noise. "Move!" But Mosi couldn't. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched, and Kwesi tackled him, pulling him out of harm's way. "Get it together, little man!" Kwesi snapped, his usual humor replaced by urgency. Mosi nodded, his face pale but determined. He scrambled to his feet, clutching the talisman as Kia thrust it into his hands. "You know what to do," she said, her voice steady. Mosi stared at the talisman, then at the stone archway of the cave. Carved into its surface were intricate patterns and symbols, glowing faintly like embers. "A riddle," he murmured, his mind racing. The symbols shifted, forming a single phrase. "What is always in the shadows but never seen in the light?" Mosi frowned, his heart pounding. The answer was just out of reach, hovering at the edges of his thoughts. Around him, the battle raged, the others fighting to keep the creatures at bay. "The answer, Mosi!" Kia shouted, her voice desperate. Mosi's eyes widened. "The past!" he shouted. The symbols flared, and the archway rumbled as a portal of swirling light and shadow appeared within it. The creatures froze, their forms flickering like dying flames. "Inside!" Singer commanded, her voice cutting through the stillness. The group sprinted toward the portal, their breaths ragged as they dove through, just as the shadows surged again. The inside of the cave was suffocatingly dark, the air heavy and thick with an unnatural stillness. The talisman's glow was the only source of light, casting long, wavering shadows on the jagged walls. Mosi stumbled, his hands shaking as he handed the talisman back to Kia. "You did it," she said, her voice soft but firm. Mosi nodded, though he didn't look at her. "I froze," he muttered. "I almost got us killed." "But you didn't," Kia said. "You figured out the riddle, and you got us through." Singer padded over, her golden eyes meeting Mosi's. "Courage is not the absence of fear," she said. "It is the decision to act in spite of it. Remember that." Mosi nodded again, his shoulders straightening slightly. The group moved deeper into the cave, the darkness growing thicker with each step. The talisman's light flickered, as if struggling against the oppressive gloom. The shadows on the walls began to shift, forming shapes and images that flickered like ghostly memories. Kia froze as a familiar figure appeared before her, a twisted version of herself, just like in the grove. "You're going to fail them," the doppelganger sneered, its voice a distorted echo. Kia clenched her fists, forcing herself to look away. Around her, the others faced their own illusions. Zahara stood frozen, staring at a vision of her family fading into the shadows. Kwesi swung his walking stick wildly at a figure that whispered his deepest doubts. Mosi clutched Kia's arm, his wide eyes fixed on the darkness. "Kia, what do we do?" She took a deep breath, her gaze locking onto the talisman. Its light flickered again, but she held it higher, focusing on its warmth. "We push through," she said. "No matter what we see, no matter what they say, we keep moving." Singer stepped forward, her fur bristling as her growl echoed through the chamber. The shadows feed on fear and doubt. Starve them, and they will fall. The group pressed on, their movements slow but steady. The illusions grew more desperate, their whispers louder, but the talisman's light held strong. Finally, they emerged into a vast, open chamber. At its center stood a pedestal, and on it rested the Rainstone, a brilliant, glowing gem that pulsed with the energy of a trapped storm. Kia's breath caught. "We found it," she whispered. But the moment she stepped forward, the shadows surged again, coalescing into a single towering figure. Ndulu. Her eyes burned like embers, her twisted staff crackling with dark energy. Her voice filled the chamber, cold and venomous. "You will never take what is mine," she hissed. The final battle had begun. Chapter 8. The Rainstone and Ndulu's Wrath. The chamber crackled with dark energy, the walls alive with writhing shadows that seemed to whisper and jeer. Ndulu stood before the pedestal, her gaunt figure wreathed in shadowy tendrils. Her staff, adorned with jagged crystals, glowed with a sinister red light. "You think you can undo centuries of my work?" Ndulu spat, her voice echoing through the chamber. "Fools! The Rainstone belongs to me now." Kia stepped forward, clutching the talisman tightly. The golden light flared in defiance, illuminating the chamber and pushing back the nearest shadows. "The Rainstone belongs to Jeluma," Kia said firmly, her voice steady despite the fear twisting in her stomach. "We're taking it back." Ndulu's laughter was cold and sharp. "You? A child with a toy? You are nothing against the power of the shadows." With a flick of her staff, the chamber erupted into chaos. Shadowy creatures sprang from the walls, their twisted forms racing toward the group with unnatural speed. "Stay together!" Singer roared, leaping forward to intercept the first wave. Her claws, glowing with golden energy, tore through the creatures, scattering them into wisps of smoke. The group sprang into action. Zahara pulled a pouch of herbs from her satchel, throwing a handful into the air. The mixture ignited, creating bursts of light that forced the shadows back. "Aim for the glowing ones!" she shouted, her voice sharp and commanding. Kwesi swung his walking stick with surprising precision, striking down smaller creatures that darted toward Mosi. "You're going to owe me a lifetime of stories after this," he called, his grin tight but genuine. Mosi clutched the talisman, his hands trembling. "What do I do?" he asked, his voice barely audible. Kia turned to him, her eyes fierce. "Trust it," she said. "Let it guide you." Mosi nodded, his resolve hardening. The talisman flared in his hands, its light forming a protective barrier around the group. Ndulu snarled, her staff glowing brighter. "Enough of this!" She raised her arms, and the shadows coalesced into a massive serpentine form that loomed over the chamber. Its glowing red eyes locked onto Kia, its maw opening to reveal rows of jagged, smoky teeth. The serpent lunged. Kia dove to the side, the talisman blazing with golden light. The serpent recoiled, hissing in pain, but it quickly reformed, its body twisting and writhing. "You cannot win," Ndulu said, her voice laced with venom. "The shadows will consume you, as they have consumed everything else." "Not this time," Kia said, her voice firm. She raised the talisman high, its glow intensifying. The energy surged through her, warm and powerful, like the first drops of rain after a long drought. "Enkaya," she whispered, "guide me." The air around Kia shifted, and the lion spirit's presence filled the chamber. A golden lioness appeared beside her, her mane shimmering with ethereal light. Enkaya's deep, resonant voice echoed in Kia's mind. "The rain is yours to call. Let go of your fear and let it flow." Kia closed her eyes, focusing on the storm building within her. She felt the pull of the talisman, the pulse of the Rainstone, the connection to the land and the sky. When she opened her eyes, they glowed with the same golden light as the talisman. She raised her arms, and the air above them began to shift. Dark clouds gathered in the chamber, swirling with energy. A single drop of water fell, then another, until the chamber was filled with the sound of rain. The serpent writhed, its smoky form dissolving in the downpour. Ndulu screamed, her voice filled with rage as the rain extinguished the shadows around her. The Rainstone began to glow brighter, its light pushing back the last remnants of darkness. "You will not take it from me!" Ndulu shouted, raising her staff. But Kia stepped forward, her gaze locked on the Rainstone. The talisman flared, its energy connecting with the artifact. The light between them surged, forming a bridge of golden energy. Ndulu's staff shattered, the shards dissolving into the rain. The witch fell to her knees, her gaunt form trembling. "You don't understand," she whispered, her voice broken. "The Rainstone. It will destroy you. It will destroy everything." Kia shook her head, her voice calm and steady. "The Rainstone doesn't destroy. It restores." With one final pulse, the talisman and the Rainstone aligned, their energies merging into a single brilliant light. The rain intensified, washing away the last of the shadows. The chamber was filled with a golden glow, warm and healing. When the light faded, the Rainstone rested in Kia's hands, its energy calm and steady. The chamber was silent, the air filled with the scent of fresh rain. Ndulu lay crumpled on the ground, her form frail and human. She looked up at Kia, her eyes filled with bitterness and something else. "You think this will save you?" she said, her voice faint. "The shadows are never truly gone." "Maybe not," Kia said, "but we'll face them. Together." Ndulu's eyes closed, and her body dissolved into mist, leaving only a faint echo of her presence behind. The group stood in silence, the weight of their victory settling over them. "We did it," Mosi said, his voice filled with awe. Zahara nodded, her gaze fixed on the Rainstone. "The land will heal now," she said. "The drought will end." Kwesi leaned on his walking stick, his grin returning. "Remind me never to doubt you again, Kia. That was incredible." Singer padded forward, her golden eyes filled with pride. "You have proven yourselves worthy," she said. "The Rainstone is safe, and the balance is restored." Kia looked down at the Rainstone, its glow reflecting in her eyes. She felt the connection between herself, the land, and the spirits, stronger than ever. "We're going home," she said softly. Chapter 9. Restoration. The first drops of rain fell as the group approached the outskirts of Jeluma. Kia clutched the Rainstone tightly, its soft glow pulsing in harmony with the talisman around her neck. The desert that had seemed so lifeless and oppressive now carried the faintest hint of renewal. The wind was cooler, the air thick with the scent of damp earth. "It's really happening," Mosi said, his voice filled with wonder. "Not just happening," Kwesi said with a grin. "We made it happen. Us." Zahara shot him a wry look. "Let's not celebrate until we actually get it back to the shrine." The village came into view, its familiar red clay huts and acacia trees standing in stark contrast to the parched, cracked earth surrounding them. As they entered, villagers began to gather, their tired faces lighting up with hope as they saw the Rainstone in Kia's hands. "It's true," someone whispered. "They found it." The crowd swelled, murmurs of awe and disbelief rippling through the air. Kia glanced at Mosi, who gave her a small, encouraging nod. She stepped forward, the Rainstone held aloft. "We've brought it back," she said, her voice carrying over the crowd. "The Rainstone is here, and the drought will end." The shrine at the heart of Jeluma had been prepared by the elders, its weathered stones cleaned, and its lion carvings freshly adorned with offerings of flowers and herbs. The village's oldest elder, Grandmother Sefu, stood at the base of the shrine, her hands trembling as she reached for the Rainstone. "You have done what we could not," she said, her voice thick with emotion. "The spirits have chosen you, Kia. Only you can return the Rainstone to its place and restore balance." Kia hesitated, the weight of the moment pressing on her. She looked back at her friends, at Zahara's steady gaze, Kwesi's crooked grin, and Mosi's quiet nod of encouragement. Finally, her eyes met Singa's. "The Rainstone calls to you," Singa said. "Trust its voice." Taking a deep breath, Kia stepped forward and placed the Rainstone on the pedestal at the center of the shrine. The moment it touched the stone, the Rainstone flared with brilliant light, sending a pulse of energy rippling through the air. The clouds overhead darkened, swirling with energy. A low rumble of thunder echoed across the savannah, and then, finally, the skies opened. The rain came in torrents, drenching the parched earth and filling the air with the sound of renewal. Villagers cried out in joy, their cheers mingling with the patter of raindrops. Children danced in the downpour, their laughter ringing through the air. Kia stood at the shrine, the rain soaking her braids and running down her face. But she didn't move. She closed her eyes, feeling the connection between herself, the Rainstone, and the spirits of the land. "You've done well," a familiar voice said. Kia turned to see Afia standing beside her, the talisman around her neck glowing faintly. Her presence was calm and grounding, her smile warm and knowing. "The Rainstone is safe," Afia said. "The spirits are pleased. But your journey is not over, Kia. The land will always need guardians." Kia nodded, her heart swelling with pride and purpose. As the rain continued to fall, the villagers gathered in the square to celebrate. Kwesi regaled the crowd with exaggerated tales of their journey, much to Zahara's exasperation. And then Kia, brave, fearless Kia, stood before the giant shadow serpent and said, "Not today," Kwesi declared, brandishing his walking stick like a sword. Zahara rolled her eyes. "That's not how it happened, and you know it." Mosi, seated near the fire, laughed quietly. Let him have his fun. He earned it. Kia joined them, her heart light for the first time in what felt like forever. She watched the villagers' joy, knowing that their struggles weren't over, but that they now had hope. Later that evening, Singa and Afia stood with Kia at the edge of the village, watching the rain fall over the fields. "You've proven yourself, Kia," Singa said. "But the Rainstone is only part of the balance. Your bond with the spirits will require care and respect." "I understand," Kia said. "I'll keep learning. I'll keep protecting Jeluma." Afia placed a hand on her shoulder. "You're not alone, child. The spirits will always be with you, and so will we." Kia smiled, her resolve stronger than ever. As the group prepared to rest for the night, Mosi approached Kia, holding the talisman. "I think this belongs to you," he said, handing it to her. Kia took it, the weight of it familiar and comforting. "We carried it together," she said. "I couldn't have done this without you." Mosi's face lit up with a rare, proud smile. "And we're not done," Kia added. "There's still so much to learn, and so much to protect." The siblings stood together, watching the rain, their bond stronger than ever. The rains continued through the night, soaking the land and bringing new life to Jeluma. The drought was over, the shadows were gone, and the spirits had been restored. Kia stood at the shrine, the rainstone glowing faintly, and felt the weight of her journey settle into something deeper, a purpose. "Even in the darkest shadows," she whispered, "there's always light." And as the rain fell, Jeluma began to bloom once more.